He is one of the best in sports journalism. Sean Gregory, Time senior editor, also former Princeton basketball player. I'm Bryan Fenley, and I am an anchor for Fox Sports Radio. So glad to have you with us. Sean, so many great pieces that you have been a part of. Obviously, you are a part of some NCAA Tournament basketball lore with that trademark win against UCLA in 1996. I want to ask you about that, particularly the last play and your vantage point from that contest, but also the work you're doing these days, Sean, as far as interviewing prominent sports figures and commissioners of pro sports leagues. Recently, Rob Manfred was on. You've also talked to Adam Silver. Before I get into the Princeton discussion and that game against UCLA, what's the one interview you've done, Sean, where it went in a completely different direction than you saw coming?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, I probably have better examples. I think one thing that sticks out in my mind, it was a long time ago, we had an interview with Maria Sharapova.
Yeah.
This was, I'm going back, this is, I think, 2005, when she was just breaking on the scene. And, I think what you worry about with big time celebrity athletes is they're not going to give you much. You have a very limited amount of time, and you worry that when you go into these interviews, you're going to come out with boring quotes.
Sure.
And you've traveled somewhere, you've scheduled, not a ton of time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's always kind of a against the clock type of deal. But I just remember this interview with Maria Sharapova when she was just starting out, and she just won, I think, Wimbledon, I guess. So maybe it was going into the US Open. There's all kinds of complications. I was supposed to meet her up in Toronto, and she didn't show up. It was like one of those nightmarish scenes. So I wound up, like, a colleague had I wound up going to his place, somewhere in Toronto, hooking up his phone and having to do a phone interview, thinking this is like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, Maria Sharapova was honest, and was a young player, before all the scandals that she's had and stuff like that.
Sure.
And I just remember that being like, that always sticks out. Like, sometimes you think, you're not going to get anything, and pleasurably it works out well. And then it's kind of weird, women's tennis. We did a cover of Serena Williams a few years ago, and that was another case where you don't know how much time you're going to get. And she's at the moment one of the most famous women in the world. I mean, without question. She had just had her child, and a lot of people wanted to talk to her. It was when she was kind of coming back from playing after having a child, and it was the summer, and it was before the US Open, which she wound up losing in the final to Naomi Osaka. And that was a situation where, like, all of a sudden it was just her and I just doing normal things. Like, I remember putting in the story, like, driving and seeing a deer. I think I helped, her credit card wasn't working in the parking spot, so I, like, spotted her 75 cents for the parking, which is funny. Like,
Yeah.
And so it was like, and it's a credit to her and to her folks for trusting time and me as the reporter there to let me in a little bit and spend more time, like an afternoon with Serena Williams, which was really, really rare. So, things you don't expect. Like, I didn't expect to be in a car with Serena Williams, being, a deer going in the road, and her comparing the deer to her child, and having that whole discussion come out. And so, that was kind of a cool moment too.
Now, Sean, I don't want to give away your secrets as to how you are able to get your athletes and your interviewees to let you in on answers that others can't. I certainly respect the ways in which you do that. But have you found, more generally speaking, ways in which over the years you have found yourself to be more compatible to getting those concrete, catchy sound bites or something interesting, and not a lot of the cliche stuff that we hear riddling our eardrums more and more, it seems, these days?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how great I am, or better I am, or worse I am than anybody else. Like, there's so many, folks who do this. I mean, the one thing generally found where you get this time and you get something out of it is just be yourself. And it's like interviews or it's like you're piloting something. Like you have to kind of have the person stay with you. You don't want them to get up and walk away.
Yeah.
You don't want, but you want them to be honest. And so there might be a topic where you kind of ease into it. You don't go right into it. You get somebody, just get people talking. And people are more open and trusting than maybe you might think going in. I think it's just you have to be yourself and kind of be polite and but don't be afraid to kind of just kind of go places that you might not think they're comfortable going, but the interviewee might be comfortable going. So it's kind of like especially when there's a time limit, you have to kind of strategize like, all right, can't do too much small talk, but you don't want to just go in for some controversial personal question. You have to kind of work your way up to that. And so that's been part of, my personal strategy, whether it's worked or not.
It definitely has worked. You're
Thank
just
you.
being humble. It's worked in a huge way. Sean Gregory with us, Times senior editor. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio. Want to get into some of the basketball stuff, but one question that I had been thinking a lot about, Sean, is what is one interview that you've done that was the hardest for you to write because it elicited an emotional response to you just by writing it? It just made it that much harder to get out, but it was a story that needed to be told.
Yeah, thanks. These are great questions, and thanks for asking them and making me think about this because, like it calls to mind a story from 6 years ago. Chad Stover was a high school football player in Missouri who died during a football game. So it was during, the height of the concussion crisis, which is
Sure.
still, obviously a huge thing, but we were trying to find a way to kind of talk about concussions in football in a human way, in a fair way. And there was in 2014, well, this incident happened in 2013, but that year around that time, there were more deaths than usual on the field due to head trauma, football field. It wasn't an overwhelmingly huge number, but more than typically. And this young man from Tipton, Missouri, smack in the middle of the state, very small town. We wanted to tell a story of one of these unfortunate incidents, but like speak to a family who's going to trust you, let you know what happened, and give their perspective and offer a heartfelt perspective about football. So we were lucky enough to connect with the Stover family. It was a week of tears. Like you're in their house and then you sit down to write and, we could tear me like I was in tears too. Like you're human and they're telling you about losing their child. It's unspeakable. At the time my child was, 8 or 9, Chad was a junior in high school. So, as a parent, it kind of felt that whole thing. My oldest child who plays sports, my youngest child, I don't want to not mention him. He was also 7 or 6, but my youngest child is a little more into sports, but my oldest child, but, yeah, it was hard. And when you sit down and write, you're worried about like, all right, like, am I doing this kid's story justice? Is it too much of the story? Because you have to get to the issues. You want to be, you have to serve the reader, and you owe the family a little bit to do their son's story justice too. And you have to find that middle ground. And it was hard. I got a lot of help on that one from editors and other writers. And I can't tell you how, when a story like that, we wound up putting him on the cover. Our former editor, Nancy Gibbs, I've never been prouder to work at Time than that. I remember the morning where she just said, we're going to put this on the cover because, a deceased high school football player on the cover of Time, like all the things you could never been done. It's not a celebrity. It's not a big political name, from a purely economics point of view. People would say, like it was so against the grain. And I've always, and I admire her and thank her for making that decision to put that story on the cover of Time magazine. And when it came out, the Stover family felt it was fair, and it did their their child justice. And that's a situation where you want this, the subject's family, you don't want to put them off and feel like you misled them and that kind of thing. And it was all pretty positive conversations from there. So that's a story where, it was like the most kind of crazy, chasing like medical reports in the middle of Tipton, Missouri. I was only there for 4 days and just kind of doing really shoe leathery type stuff in a strange place. Place I'd never been to, very small town, walking into places unannounced, trying to get stuff that people don't want to necessarily give you. That was a really eye-opening and memorable experience, something I'll never forget.
Your stories in sports go from high school to college and obviously to pro and the elite in pro. One you did recently was Damian Lillard, part of your Time 100 talks. And I thought it was fascinating, Sean, when he described and when you asked him about the hotel he was in, and he said it was a downgrade from the one before. And I was just like, wow, really? I mean, here you are, you're the face of the NBA and you're moving from one hotel to another in the bubble because you got to the playoffs and it's worse off. But when you interviewed him, Sean, what was it about his core beliefs and his persona that was different than a lot of the other superstars in the NBA that we see today?
Yeah, I think I was very surprised and very happy how great he was. I mean, he was willing to just talk. He made it very relaxed. You go into things, again, like worrying you have, especially the live, the Time 100 talks, you can't go too long.
Sure.
Because it can throw off the whole show. So that's a new thing we've started doing on camera. But yeah, I mean, he was just laying in his bed, just having a talk,
Yeah.
and he was open about, feeling underappreciated, having a chip on his shoulder. He wasn't about to throw, quotable lines where teams could come out and put it
Yes.
on there. He wasn't going to offer the bulletin board material, but I think it was interesting. He was talking about how, him and Steph Curry, are they changing the game or not? He was kind of comparing, I think he was saying that he's going for like 40 point foot bombs, 3-point shots a little more aggressively than Steph Curry, which was kind of interesting. I just he was pretty open about, and the super team thing too. I thought that was really,
Yes.
he was really just like, listen, no disrespect to LeBron James, no disrespect to Kevin Durant. He admires those guys. He's not going to rip them. It'd be very silly for him to rip LeBron James in the middle of a playoff series, but he was also honest. Like, that's not my style. And I just love that a guy is just willing to say, like, it's so much sweeter if I do it in one place. And now, if for some reason he does sign somewhere else, you can go back and look at the record and say, what changed? And it might change. But I didn't get the sense from his conviction that it was going to change anytime soon. And it's an interesting model for like a Giannis, right? Like, like, do you, how important is the title? And we can go on and talk, about Kevin Durant's decisions and the titles that different players have won. And I love how he brought up Dirk Nowitzki as his model, and that seems to fit perfectly for what he wants to do. And it'll be fascinating to see, especially if he keeps playing, this level he's playing at is just astronomical. I remember when Curry came on the scene, started doing that, all, the crazy threes, but this is something new. Damian Lillard's been a great player for a long time. But not like this in this spotlight during this pandemic time where, so many people care about seeding game, the last 8 games of the regular season. Who cares? Now people care. So it was really neat to talk to him in that moment, and hopefully his injury's okay, and
Absolutely
have a fair fight between the Lakers and the Blazers.
Sean Gregory with us with Time. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio, and there was one quote from your discussion with him, and you brought this up just a second ago, where he says, "At times I do feel underappreciated, but I don't lose sleep over it." End quote. I believe him. I know there's a lot of guys in the league that say something like that, but they still care about what people think about them. I really do believe that Dame does not care and that he is at peace with people's perceptions of him. The perceptions of being on that Princeton 96 team against UCLA, So you've made it explicitly clear that you were on the bench for that game, but you had a front row seat. What's an added thrill that you experience from your vantage point, from being on the bench the whole time and taking in the sights and the sounds of that point, that even guys in the game did not experience that you can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I'd much rather experience what Gabe Lewells was experiencing
Yeah.
when he was a guy who was like, my friend in my economics class that year, great guy, but and then all of a sudden he's a national sensation. It was crazy seeing, people you're around suddenly become nationally famous. But I mean, one thing I do remember on the last play was kind of seeing it all unfold and like rising off the bench as it was unfolding in anticipation of what might happen and then ultimately what did happen. You just kind of, I remember, I was very peripheral to the huddle. The game was tied. Yes, the game was tied. And I remember not kind of being in the huddle or listening to what was going on, but I feel like I kind of knew the play we were running. And I could briefly describe it. It's called center forward backdoor. In the first half, the guard, Mitch Henderson in this case, the coach of Princeton, throws it to our center, Steve Goodrich, on the elbow. And then on the wing, Gabe Lewells, in this case, just cut back door in the first half. Just as soon as Steve got it, cut back door against Charles O'Bannon. Steve, he was wide open by like 10 feet. It's a little misdirection. Mitch goes this way, throws it to Steve. Gabe cuts, bang. And he was open by 10 feet in the end of the first half. It just worked to perfection. But what the quirk we added for the last play, it was like, let's do this again. But he's not, the defender's not going to fall for it again. So you have to cut once, and then Steve looks and then looks the other way as if, I think it was Mitch at that point again, was supposed to come off a screen. So like Steve, it's like looking to see the screen that's supposed to be happening, and then looks back again, and Gabe cuts again. So it was a second cut if you watch it. And that was the key to the whole thing, because in the first half, we got him on the first cut. And so in that huddle, the coaches agreed, told them, hey, Gabe, you have to do it twice. And so just being on the bench, I kind of I guess, not remembering if I knew we were supposed to do it twice or whatever, but like seeing him do it once and then come back out. And then I'm like, all right, let's see what happens here. He's going to come back. And it was such a brilliant play because Steve had to, really thread the needle on that pass. Gabe had to, you get the ball, you have Charles O'Bannon behind you. That's a tough finish, and Chris Johnson helping from the other side. It was really a phenomenal play. So just kind of having a sense that maybe the viewer at home, and maybe, hopefully not, I guess maybe not the UCLA defenders, like maybe they don't know that was coming, but as just somebody who knew our offense and wasn't by no means an expert as a sophomore, it just took me particularly a while to figure out what was going on. But just having a sense that something was about to happen. And I kid, like, if you see they always show the bench reaction, and I kid about how proud I am that I was kind of the first guy up, because, I always say, like, I think I was, because I think I just had this thing like, oh my God, this is happening. I kid, like, yeah, I saw it before everybody, which totally isn't true, but I just, so that was kind of a cool thing to kind of see it all unfold.
You had this like premonition. You had this sixth sense of what was taking place.
Believe me, if I did have a sixth sense about that kind of stuff, maybe I'd be on the court. Like, my problem was, like, I couldn't pass in that system like the Mitch Hendersons and Steve Goodriches could. So it's just that's why it's like a funny thing amongst us that I'm like, hey, I saw it before. Meanwhile, I was like the dumbest player on the whole team as far as figuring out our offense. It really took me longer than others. And maybe by my senior year, I felt most comfortable finally.
There you go. Allow yourself to brag a little bit, Sean. You've been very humble when you talk about your own basketball game. And then you've had a chance to catch up with a lot of these UCLA guys over the years and get their feedback and response. What's been most glaring from what they've had to say about that game?
Yeah, in 2011, Time decided, for some reason, let me do this like 8,000, I think the main story was like 7,000 word story about this game, because the thinking was, people knew where they were. Like, it always struck me that people knew where they were when I would mention my association with Princeton basketball. Oh, UCLA? Oh, I was here. It seemed to kind of stick with people. And so I pitched it to an editor at Time thinking, no way this is going to work. We have so much other important things to cover. And he wasn't a basketball guy. A guy named Jim Frederick, who was running time.com at the time, who's unfortunately passed away. Great guy, and will always be, a debt of gratitude to him, that he emailed me back thinking this isn't going to go anywhere. It was like, hey, I was at my dorm at Columbia during the time. Like, even he, not a sports fan, watched that game and appreciated it, told me to go out and do it. And the most fun part about that was reporting it out and talking to the UCLA, folks on the UCLA side. I kind of knew what our guys thought, and they told some great stories too, don't get me wrong, but catching up with Chris Johnson, Charles O'Bannon, guys like Brandon Lloyd, wound up speaking to Reggie Miller, who was at the game.
He was booed, wasn't he?
He was booed, yeah, and he got on the phone, and I think the first thing he said was like, "Oh, so you're the guy trying to make me look bad or something?" He was like totally game to just like, say like, yes, so he turned his hat around.
That's right.
They showed him on the big screen in Indiana, in Indianapolis, at the height of Pacers' power. He was beloved. He gets on the big screen, everybody cheers. He has a backwards hat on, turns the hat around, says UCLA. Everyone boos Reggie Miller because the crowd had turned to our side, and they're rooting for the underdog in a 50,000 seat state. However many people were there. So. And Reggie Miller, I think he said something along the lines of, you guys won the crowd, you conquered the crowd, you conquered the game. And so, yeah, he realizes his turning around the hat just fueled the fire a little bit. But so everyone was a great sport about it. Like, they weren't like, there's no bitterness or anything, just honesty. And I wasn't calling to like, ha, we won. Like, it was as a reporter being like, what, Chris Johnson, like, how close did you get to blocking that shot? I almost got it. If my fingernails were longer, I would have gotten it. Charles O'Bannon, kind of walking through the last play with me. I think he was on the phone from Japan. So it was really, I those guys, it's been fun. And I've kept in touch with Chris Johnson, particularly on Twitter and stuff. He's, a huge basketball guy, and going back and forth once in a while about the game and other stuff is really, really cool.
My final question for you, Sean, and this has been so much fun listening to you go back and talk about these basketball stories and even giving us a sense of what you're doing right now, is from that 96 game, what's the one congratulatory note that you got or your team got that you remember vividly that's the most stitched into your memory?
It's funny you mention that. I hope this is here. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, for sure.
I found, now I'm not going to find it, of course. Oh, here we go. Is this it?
Oh my gosh, you got it.
Okay. So this is so weird. So I was just clearing it. We were just kind of cleaning up and clearing stuff out. And for some reason, I had a whole bunch of miscellaneous stuff from like my sophomore through senior years of college in some bin or something like that. And I remember after that game, like, we went to like a mall somewhere, and we had our Princeton and sweatpants and stuff, and we were treated like celebrities. Like, it was like people were asking us for autographs, and guys who didn't even play in the game, like, we were just like, it was a weird, like, we were honestly like, I remember our SID saying, our sports information director saying, like, he gave his credit card at his restaurant. They saw Princeton, and they were like, "Can I get your autograph?" So anyway, I found a note from a Enzo Pizza in Indianapolis.
Oh my gosh!
This was in my thing, and on the back it says, "Sorry for the money." I don't know if it says money. Sorry for the something. Can you send us a picture of you to Enzo Pizza? A signed picture of you. Can you send us a signed picture of you? So sorry. I guess it says sorry for them. I don't know what sorry. I can't. The handwriting's great. Isn't great.
Yeah.
But this is what I'm talking about. So I have a note from a guy in Indianapolis on this business card. On the back, it says, "Can you send us a signed picture of you?" Now, again, I just described how my claim to fame in that game was like I stood up on the bench, right?
Yeah.
But but it just goes to show, I can't believe I found this because it matched my memory of like being treated like a celebrity.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Carl Peretti of Enzo Pizza, if you're watching this. I didn't send it because I just was like I can't, like, come on.
Yeah.
It's like, but it was really it's just fresh in my mind because I found this like a week ago.
Wow.
And I can hold, I don't know if you can see it, but
There we go, right there. Yeah. He
yeah.
looks like he says sorry for the money. That's
Sorry for the money.
yeah.
I don't know if
And this is a signed picture of you to their, and there's their address.
yeah.
Oh my God.
Maybe sorry for the money, he didn't have change or something. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, something like that.
So
Wow.
there you have it. It was like a ghost from the past shows up in some bin.
That's so crazy, Sean. I ask you that question, and then you have like the best answer, like readily available. Like, I promise anybody who listens and watches this, Sean and I did not choreograph that.
No,
we did not.
No.
That interaction right there, we did not choreograph.
It just happened to be. I'm glad I set up on my messy desk because it's there and it just popped in my mind. So thanks for asking. But yeah, no, that's it. It's like archaeological evidence of like being a celebrity for a day in 1996.
Well, with the work you're doing now in sports journalism, you are a celebrity every day. It has been a pleasure. Sean Gregory, go check out his work at Time. I'm Bryan Fenley. Sean, this was so much fun. I really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it, Brian. Thanks for reaching out and having me. This was great.